Welcome back to Retro Wednesday at the Titanium Hangar. This is Mike, and today I want to talk to you about something a little bit different. I have been collecting a lot of these vintage toy lines that could be considered failures, but I've had a lot of fun collecting them, and some of the toy lines are some of the most unique toys that are out there. So today I want to talk to you about what makes a toy line a success or a failure, and what you had to do back in the 80s to be successful. A recipe of 5 categories that I have kind of come up with that seem to fit most of the most successful toy lines. And then I'm going to show you some examples of those that didn't meet those criteria and failed, and others that met them all and succeeded. We're going to talk about this coming up. Alright, so the first thing is, did it have a cartoon? Now, a lot of people feel like a comic book was enough to launch a toy line into stratosphere in the 80s, and it was not. It was enough to get it started, to whet an appetite, so that companies would have confidence, or to inspire confidence, go to another second and third series. And here we go with POWERLORDS. They did not have a cartoon. They did have one commercial that I saw. Maybe they had a few different commercials, but one that I keep seeing floating around out there. They also had a comic book, and that wasn't enough to really drive the line. I had Adam Power when I was a kid. I had really no interest in the rest of them, although they're the most interesting figures in the 80s. You just have to say, hands down, some of these designs are just so way out there and cool, and they still hold up today and look fantastic on a shelf. They also had a play set that rivaled Castle Grayskull. It actually was, in some ways, double Castle Grayskull. It was a really cool play set, and a lot of really cool, interesting vehicles. This is a whole lot of fun with this toy line, but no cartoon, no longevity. Now, POWERLORDS at least had 2 series, but this CRYSTAR, I don't believe, had a second series. They have deluxe figures, which were a separate shipment than the standard figures. And of course, you have the playset, both the dragons and the catapult. So this actually had quite a bit going for it, but only had a comic book. And because of the comic book, though, now it's a technicality that Hasbro found they could make a CRYSTAR figure in the modern day in their Marvel Legends line. Hopefully they make it all, but they probably won't, and I that's sad. But this toy line, I had the dragon and the dragon rider, and I think that's all I had. I might have had one more figure, but the dragon stood out to me. It was a lot of fun. I played the heck out of it. I don't ever remember my dragon having wings, so I don't remember wings on mine. Sure, I broke them day one, but this was a fun toy line. As an adult collecting this, it's a lot of fun, and collecting clear stuff, and I've been picking up some modern clear figures. Can't wait for the CRYSTAR review from that. But if it had a cartoon, it could have had legs. It could have gone a lot further than it did. And with that, it needed a cartoon, not just a comic book. Now, I want to say Visionaries is a toy line that was semi-successful. They only had the 1 series. They didn't get the Series 2 stuff out. They had a lot planned for it. They did have a cartoon. It was a short-run cartoon. It either had 12 or 22 episodes. So this was not enough to hit syndication. So the magic thing about the cartoon is it had to have syndication, had to be there on the daily, not just Saturday morning. Saturday morning wasn't enough to carry an entire toy line. Visionaries had a lot of promise, but the fact you didn't see it every day, it didn't reinforce it to you. Kids didn't really want to buy it that much. It has a huge cult following. Hopefully it makes a comeback. So the next criteria is scale. 3.75, 4-inch scale dominated, absolutely dominated the toys in the 80s. And RAMBO figures were cool, interesting, and fun. They had a show, they had several vehicles, they had a play set. They had pretty much everything that you'd expect going for a toy line, but a lot of people considered it a failure, even though it had 2 series. The Series 2 is really hard to get, and it did have a lot more popularity in South America than in the US in the later years. But these did not scale with your 3.75-inch figures. They really didn't have much to battle except themselves, and there weren't a whole lot of figures. Originally came out with like 12 figures, and then another 6 in Series 2, which really wasn't that much. If they would have done a whole lot more, which we'll see in another toy line, they could have held their own at their own scale, but they didn't scale. Cool toy line. I love RAMBO. I love RAMBO figures. The show was sort of okay, but it should have also been carried a little bit more by the movies. As a kid, I watched all the RAMBO movies. Kidder Centurion suffered the same fate. I had these as a kid. I loved them as a kid. I had about half of what's in this picture when I was a kid. But they didn't scale with pretty much any other toys that I had. I only had like 1 or 2 Rambo figures, and these are still a little bit bigger than Rambo figures. They were in a scale of their own. I think that they couldn't have made them a whole lot smaller, or the whole plug-in gimmick, those little plug-ins would have snapped real easy if they were much smaller than this. But looking at this toy line, it is a whole lot of fun. I have a lot of great memories from it. I still had fun collecting it today. But it didn't scale well. It had everything going for it with a great cartoon. It was a lot of fun. We're going to talk about a little bit more of these points, but yep, didn't really scale. I could give scale examples all day long, but the last one I'm going to use here is Spyro Zone, another fun toy line. I've reviewed pretty much the whole toy line, and when it comes to Rambo, most of the toy line has been reviewed. Anyway, looking at this, it was just a little bit too big, and the soft goods I think were a turnoff for kids. They felt it was a little bit too close to Barbie dolls, I guess, but they were ahead of their time because this is something that people really like today, and these kind of figures are very impressive in the Mezco area and all of that, but they didn't scale with your Joes. It didn't really work, and there wasn't enough with the 9 figures, the 4 vehicles, and no playset to carry its own. Next up, we have the fun factor. Was your toy line fun? I mean, obviously, if you have a cartoon, and then, of course, they all scale together with sort of in the world that you're building in your own little room as a kid, was it fun? Were the toys fun? There was nothing fun about Willow figures. The Japorshnovich, no, the Kavorsisk dragon, that's the highlight of the toy line, the dragon. It's like if Dungeons & Dragons Tiamat was the highlight of the toy line. Like if Tiamat was the only cool thing in your toy line, Dungeons & Dragons would have failed. This, well, I don't even know if that playset is even part of Willow. I don't know if half this stuff is part of Willow. It really is just like little of the statue figures. Does not look like fun. I saw them in stores when I was a kid, and I thought, heck no. They didn't scale with my stuff, and they were not fun. No, not at all. The movie was okay. I felt the same way about Dune. I really don't think Dune was a good movie that kids enjoyed. I did not like it as a kid. I could not sit through it as a kid. The sandworms were my favorite part of the movie. Like, I would actually pay attention to the sandworm scene, and that's it, really. And the rest of it was just boring background nonsense when I was a kid. As an adult, I really enjoyed watching the movie. I watched it 5 times to try to get all the context, the subtle things. I still didn't get it all, but enough. I'm looking forward to the sequel to the modern one. But as a toy line, it's an okay toy line based off a very boring movie for a kid. And with that, it's not fun. Speaking of not fun, this is going to make a lot of people mad, and I don't really care, but Silverhawks weren't fun. They just weren't. Back in the day, I mean, what's fun about squeezing legs together and arms popping out to the side? When I never owned any Silverhawks as a kid, I played with my friends and thought, these suck. And the vac metal we took for granted. I took the vac metal for granted. Nowadays, vac metal is few and far between, and it's like gold. I love the vac metal. And collecting these today to get them without being all scratched up or rubbed off and all that kind of stuff is really hard and very expensive. But they look beautiful on a shelf, and the way I collect today, I mean, they fit my needs today really well. They stand on a shelf, look good. Are they fun? Sadly, the cheap bad guys are way more fun to interact with than any of the good guys. The next point I want to cover, so like my 4th point here, is longevity of the toy line. You can actually start a toy line and it does okay the year 1, but if you keep perpetually, continually putting out more figures, more content, and you gain a larger following as it goes, you can have a snowball effect. And I kind of feel like that's what Thundercats had. Now, they did start really strong with their first series, and I think it actually tapered off as it went. But when I collected Thundercats as an adult, it was shocking how many people absolutely loved Thundercats, and I was shocked how big the toy line was. I was shocked it had 130 episodes for the TV show. It checks all the boxes. It's fun. This is definitely a fun toy line to get in on. And so with all of that, it's a win. I believe this one is a success because of the fact it checks all of the boxes. Kind of the same thing with Masters of the Universe. I believe that was a successful toy line, but you start looking at what boxes did it tick and what did it not tick. And you look at it, had a great cartoon, a lot of fun. It was fun to follow. You had a lot of longevity with this toy line. It went on for years. It wasn't just 1 year. It wasn't a one-hit wonder, one and done. But it didn't scale with what was trending as the 80s continued. And with that, it felt a little bit like cheap toys with the lack of articulation and a few other things. But one thing I do want to say is I did get the Point Dread and Talon Fighter. When you think about longevity, adding a whole other mini playset to your main playset was ingenious, and that reinvigorated my entire love for the toy line for one more year. But after that, it just kind of fell off. But this is actually going to be a victim of the last one. Actually, I'm not sure what ended this. A lot of people say it was She-Ra, but Kenner Mask did it right. They were awesome. I gotta say, that is blowing up on my channel right now. More people are watching Kenner Mask videos on my channel than even my news videos. There's more interest in Mask on my channel this month, and several months it tops the charts because it was that big. They did it all right. Kenner did right by this line. So number one, they had the cartoon, and it was a great cartoon. It was a lot of fun, but it was partially part of the demise. And then they had a scale. Now the scale was a little smaller than G.I. Joe, but it could stretch to win. I wonder if the page punchers they make now are about the same size. I don't have any, but the more I think about it, if they're making G.I. Joe page punchers, that might fit with these, and that would be kind of a fun little circle getting connected. And then they were fun. They were a lot of fun because of all of the interactivity and then the transformations of them. They did it all. Longevity, this went on for 4 years, 4 seasons, 4 series of this. Not so much seasons, but 4 years of this. So that's definitely longevity. In the 80s, you made it past a year or two, and it is still a lot of fun. You picked up people along the way. And then I think the demise was the cartoon got away from its original formula. Definitely a success. So the final one is collect them all. The ability to collect them all, or to understand what all there was to collect, or the excitement surrounding collecting all of them. And maybe you wouldn't collect them all, but it was something fun to chase after, to go after, to try to track them down. Star Wars really started the whole collect them all, and that was something that other companies started to mimic and follow down the road. Star Wars' ultimate demise was lack of media, because once 85 hit, the 1983 movie was already worn out, and the new cartoons just flat out sucked. And so there was so much competition they couldn't keep up with a couple of lousy cartoons and very little product coming out. It was over. You know who really capitalized on this collect them all idea that Kenner started was Hasbro with G.I. Joe. Yeah, Hasbro, the laying off 1,100 people at Christmas Hasbro. That's the same Hasbro. Well, maybe it's a different Hasbro today. But these figures, on the back, you would see all of the figures that were coming. You'd get excited about them. You'd want to go chase them all down. Some of them would be like, I don't care about this one, but I care about all of these other ones. But with it, it was a lot of fun. And G.I. Joe did absolutely every single thing right on this list. G.I. Joe had a cartoon and had longevity. G.I. Joe had everything going for it. The whole collect them all each year. But I gotta tell you, one thing about G.I. Joe was that everybody wasn't on board day one. My brother wasn't even on board in 1982. It wasn't until 1983 that my brother even started collecting this. So he was a year behind, and he had a friend that was collecting it in 82 that kind of got him excited about it, and he started. But my brother was a few years older than me, so I lived vicariously through his collection, and I thought it was okay, but Star Wars was still the best in 1983, plus 1984 brought me Transformers, plus a bunch of other stuff going on. I didn't get into it until 1985. My calendar was free a little bit. There was Mask going on. I could swing Mask and this at the same time, but yeah, it was a crazy time back in the 80s. But I gotta say, something about longevity, having that cartoon go on for years, having the syndication, having all the stuff that's going on, and something else I'm going to talk about in the future is having those contests that they had on the cartoon where you like string together these letters for a word, mail in the word, and maybe you win, maybe you don't. And I know somebody that won, so it was pretty cool. But this is something that longevity, it's proof that if you have your toys out there, you have confidence in your toy line, you put enough money in it and time and effort, you're going to get the payoff. G.I. Joe got the payoff because they did every single thing right. But I was in on it in 85. Imagine how many people they picked up in the later years, like 88, 89, 90. Because not everybody started in 1982, and this toy line actually grew, and a lot of the cooler things happened. 1986 was my climax for it, but I still had 88 and 89 figures that I absolutely love. Now, one of the ones that I want to think, I don't want to call Battle Beast a failure, but Battle Beast is a failure. Because collecting it all was impossible. It just seemed like an impossible feat. Me personally, I didn't like the scale of them, so they didn't scale with anything I had. And I had a few of these, and you get that random gift you don't really care about, and it's like, oh, I'll give it a shot. Oh, this isn't for me. But the commercials were out there, but there was no show. And there's some sort of history and tie to Transformers. I love Transformers. I didn't know it as a kid, and so I didn't care. So there's a lot of things that were going against this toy line. But I mean, if you look at this long list here, there's over 100. And I thought there were closer to 300 of these things, but I don't really know. I mean, I still really don't know what all is inclusive. I have 40 of them, and it cost me about $300 over the course of a few months, and I was like, it's not for me. And so I kind of stopped. Now, I'm not saying I won't start it back up, but this is one of those toy lines that back in the day needed a cartoon, not just that 1, 2, 3 commercials. I don't know if you had a comic book, maybe it did, but this toy line could have been more than it was if they did it different. So I can give more examples all day long, and I might actually do that in the future because this is a whole lot of fun talking about vintage toy lines. It's just coming up with an excuse to talk about many different vintage toy lines in one video. I think it's a whole lot of fun, and I think a lot of people would like to watch that because personally, I would love to watch that. But what do you think about these 5 points, and what other points would you add to this and say, here's another reason they might pass or fail, they might succeed or fail? Let me know in the comments below, like and subscribe, and Titanium Hanger out.